Why thinking about it feels like doing something. One of the most convincing mistakes of the mind is the feeling that thinking deeply about something means you are moving it forward. You revisit it, analyze it, turn it over, look at it from different angles. And because so much mental energy is being used, it starts to feel like progress, as if attention itself were action, as if inner effort were the same thing as change. But they are not the same. Thinking can create movement inside the mind without creating movement in reality. This is what makes the pattern so difficult to notice. You are not doing nothing. You are active, engaged, occupied. There is effort, there is focus, there is concern. So from the inside, it does not feel like avoidance. It feels responsible. It feels like you are taking the issue seriously. But often, what is happening is more subtle. Thought is being used to create the feeling of involvement without entering consequence. You stay mentally close to the problem so you do not feel like you abandoned it. But staying mentally close is not the same thing as changing anything. This is why long periods of thinking can feel strangely productive while leaving everything exactly where it was. The mind confuses occupation with movement. And once that confusion begins, thinking itself starts to feel like a form of doing. What gives this pattern so much force is that thinking does change something. It changes pressure. When you think about a problem, you feel involved with it. You feel close to it. You feel mentally engaged. You feel like you have not ignored it. And that closeness creates relief. Not full relief, but enough to make inaction feel less visible. This is why thinking can become a substitute for movement. It produces the sensation that something is happening, that the issue is being worked on, that progress is being made, that your effort means the situation is not standing still. But mental movement is not the same as structural movement. You can think for hours without changing a condition. You can review everything without altering a pattern. You can become highly articulate about a problem while staying exactly inside it. This is the hidden trap. Thought gives you the emotional reward of engagement without the exposure of action. No risk, no consequence, no feedback, no real interruption to what is already in place. And because there is effort, the mind rarely questions it. It assumes, if this takes so much energy, it must be useful. But energy is not proof of progress. Sometimes it is only the cost of circling. The issue stays mentally active, and that activity starts to feel like forward motion. That is where the mistake deepens. You stop asking whether anything is changing and start valuing the sheer fact that you are still thinking about it. This is why thinking can feel strangely satisfying, even when nothing changes. The mind is not only producing ideas, it is producing proximity. You stay close to the issue, close to the tension, close to the possibility that something important is still being handled. That closeness matters, because distance from the issue would feel like neglect. So thought becomes a way of staying involved without stepping into what would actually test whether movement is real. This is where the pattern starts looking like responsibility. You care, you return to it, you keep giving it attention. And attention, from the inside, feels moral. It feels like the opposite of avoidance. But attention can also be a form of postponement, not because you do not care, because care is being expressed in the safest possible medium, thought. Inside thought, everything can remain reversible. You can explore, reconsider, refine, and restart. Nothing has to be exposed to consequence. Nothing has to become concrete. This is why thinking often expands exactly where action would force reduction. Action chooses, action tests, action removes alternatives. Thought keeps alternatives alive. And keeping alternatives alive feels like intelligence. but often it is only protection from commitment. The more you think, the less you have to discover what reality will actually do with what is in your mind. That is why certain problems stay mentally active for so long. Not because they are impossible, because thinking about them keeps postponing the moment they would have to become real. What makes this pattern so difficult to interrupt is that the mind does not experience all this thinking as repetition. It experiences it as necessity. One more pass, one more angle, one more attempt to finally make it clear. The next thought always feels as if it could be the one that changes everything. But usually, it changes very little. It only extends the feeling that something is still being dealt with. This is why the loop can continue for so long. Not because the mind found the answer, because it keeps producing the sensation that the answer is almost here, almost clear, almost finished, almost ready. And almost is enough to keep the system engaged. This is the deeper structure. Thinking does not only delay action, it also delays contact with the fact that nothing is moving yet. As long as thought continues, the mind can still believe it is in process, still working, still approaching, still not quite done. That state feels safer than reality, because reality would answer quickly. Either something changes or it does not. Either the pattern weakens or it stays where it was. Thought protects you from that kind of clarity. It lets you remain inside preparation without entering consequence. And that is why thinking about something can feel so much like doing something. Not because it creates change, because it postpones the moment when change would have to become visible. There is also another reason this pattern survives. Thinking protects self-image. As long as something remains inside thought, you can still imagine yourself as someone who is approaching it, someone serious, someone reflective, someone engaged. That image matters, because once action begins, the image is no longer enough. Reality starts measuring what thought was only suggesting, and that is a very different experience. Inside thought, you can still feel capable without being tested, still feel responsible without having to risk consequence, still feel close to change without discovering whether change is actually happening. This is why thinking can become so emotionally persuasive. It does not only create activity, it preserves possibility. And possibility is easier to inhabit than reality, because possibility has not yet answered back. It has not reduced your options. It has not shown your limits. It has not forced anything to become concrete. That is why the mind keeps returning there, not only for clarity, for protection. And until that protection is seen, thinking will keep feeling more useful than it really is. This is where the pattern begins to become visible. Not when thought stops, but when thinking is no longer confused with movement. You begin to notice that the issue still feels active, not because it is progressing, but because it is being revisited again and again. The mind stays busy, and busyness creates the emotional impression that something important is underway. But once that impression is questioned, something changes. You start asking, what is actually different because I have thought about this so many times? That question is difficult because it removes the protective blur between mental effort and real change. Now the mind has to face something simpler. A problem can stay intellectually active while remaining structurally untouched. A situation can feel constantly processed while never actually moving. That is the threshold, the moment when thinking stops feeling noble and starts becoming visible as a way of staying close without stepping in. This does not mean thought has no value. It means thought has to stop pretending to be action. Because once that pretense weakens, something more honest appears. You can still think, but Now you also see when thought is being used to delay the point where reality would finally have to answer back. That is the shift. Not less intelligence, less substitution. This is inner cognition.